Hey folks, Matt Easton here. So let's talk a little bit more about the butt. So the butt, many people when I did a video, in fact when I've done videos in the past as well, talking about bayonets, muskets and rifles. I'll refer to this as a musket. It is in fact a rifle, but it was known as a rifled musket. It was the first universal, it's being the Enfield rifled musket incidentally, it was the first universally available to British forces rifle in the British Army. There were of course rifles, the Baker rifle and the Brunswick rifle before that, but this was the one that was given to all troops as standard. Previously only riflemen had had them. So bayonets attached to muskets. A lot of people have commented that wouldn't the use of the butt be really important and really a powerful strike in bayonet fighting or bayonet fencing. And indeed, yes, that's true. The butt can be used, it can be applied with a lot of force. You can stick the butt in someone's face, or you can stick the butt in someone's groin, basically anywhere. And of course there's essentially two main ways that the butt is applied. It's either applied with a swinging motion, or it can indeed be applied with a thrusting or jabbing motion. But the point that I mostly made in response to people talking about the butt is that generally speaking, I would argue that if you're using your butt, then it's because the tip of your weapon has been pushed aside and is no longer kind of useful or possible to use. Always your priority is going to be applying the point of the weapon into the other person's body. And if you can't get deep penetration with the point because your point's been cast aside or parried or grabbed or something else, then at that point, bam, absolutely, the butt into the chin or the face or the sternum or the groin or anywhere you can hit, really, mostly body, neck and face. Theoretically you could equally hit the butt into someone's limbs as well, but generally speaking in the manuals that I've studied, for example if we look at Hutton's works on the bayonet, such as fixed bayonets from 1890 I believe, if you look at there, the butt is generally applied when the point has been essentially parried or put out of action, and the butt is put in usually to the chin or the groin. Because of course these are areas where you're going to apply a lot of pain relatively easily to the person's body. So say for example I'm fighting with someone, bam 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 here, and they knock my point offline here and charge in. If they're charging in at me or if they've grabbed my weapon, bam, into there, into the chin, is going to stop them and break their progress and enable me to get my point back and then thrust them. So I kind of view the use of the butt with the bayonet a little bit how I view the use of grappling, for example, in longsword, in that I view it as very often it's there to facilitate you stabbing the person or cutting the person, usually stabbing, obviously with the bayonet stabbing. So absolutely, I completely agree that the butt of a musket is a very effective thing to hit someone with in the right circumstances. What you absolutely do not want to do is be fighting at point range with someone, trying to stab them, and just decide to try and hit them with the butt from this distance. That would be suicidal because you're going to run onto their point. Where you could potentially, and I would take this from longsword technique, so this is an adaptation of one of Fury's techniques in longsword, a sort of translation, as it were, from weapons and periods. If, for example, their bayonet point is out here and I push their bayonet point to the side, it might be that by occupying their weapon to the side, what I can then do is step in and hit them with the butt here. So if I've occupied the point of their weapon with the point of my weapon, that might be a situation where I could use my butt offensively. And there's nothing wrong with using your butts offensively if you want to. You know, it's up to you what you use your butts for. But I would say, generally speaking, what you don't want to do is just charge in with your butt without covering the person's bayonet, without occupying the person's bayonet, because it's going to be suicide. So the priority always has to be this. Okay, this is your main business end, and really only 4 inches of penetration is pretty much going to end most people. And in fact, penetration with the bayonet is so easy that it was more of a danger to actually over-penetrate. And one of the risks, especially with these bayonets, as it happens, because as you can see, they've got a very long shaft, and when the person's body essentially comes down the shaft, it butts into the barrel and stops at that point. And I know one record from the 19th century of a charging opponent coming at someone, and they put their bayonet out and ran it through the person's chest, and their body came all the way up, right the way up to the butt, and came so far up that actually this angle here, at the bottom of the blade, actually got stuck inside the person's chest cavity, and they had to struggle to extract the weapon. And I can't remember if that meant that they got wounded by another opponent, but I can't remember the source. I'll have to dig it out and I'll read that out to you at some point. But in essence, over-penetration was a really big problem. It was also a problem with cavalry swords and lances, incidentally, but just focusing on bayonets for now. So in actual fact, whilst with modern knife bayonets and short guns, if you look at modern bayonet training videos, and if you look at bayonet training, if you search bayonet training on YouTube, for example, you'll find lots of videos from World War II in particular and after World War II. There are a few earlier ones which are very interesting and very different, it has to be noted, but you'll notice from World War II and afterwards, they kind of abandon bayonet fencing and just go into the mentality of, charge, stab, 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 and then, charge, stab, 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 into the next person. So there's lots of stabbing of hay bales and sandbags with no real technique. It's mostly, and this is not a criticism, but it's mostly about teaching the soldiers to be aggressive and charge forward, not be afraid, stab, 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 and attack, attack, attack. And of course, this is partly because the weapons have changed. They've got, generally speaking, shorter rifles and shorter bayonets, but also because warfare had changed hugely. If you're charging at someone with a bayonet in World War II or the Korean War or Vietnam or something, you're unlikely to meet an opponent who's going to fight you back with a hand weapon. For the most part, it's jumping into trenches and taking those trenches and stabbing people who probably aren't really fighting back at that point, or they're maybe trying to shoot you. So it's about covering ground quickly and stabbing the opponents quickly and then moving on to the next person. It's about taking ground, really. So coming back to the butt, in actually a modern use of rifles or carbines, we could say, most modern rifles of course being carbines because they're short, the butt may indeed be taught a lot. And I know in the US military for a long time, I don't know if it's still the case, pugil sticks were used for training, a way of training bayonet use, or at least the use of the firearm in close combat. And of course, if you do pugil fighting, bam, 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 you're hitting with both ends equally, so it's going to promote the use of the butt. But what I would say is that's actually a fairly ineffective way if you're actually intending to use a bayonet against someone else who might also have a bayonet, or indeed a sword. But what I would say is that, in defence of it, is that with a modern short, with an M16 or an SA80 or an AKM or whatever, or a G36, they're fairly short weapons. And in actual fact, with them, you can see the argument for using the butt a lot more because it's a very short weapon. There is another element to this as well. Bayonets, historically and in the modern world, are not always used for killing enemies. In actual fact, I've noticed this in the comments underneath any video I do about bayonets. A lot of people talk about, bayonets are, people say they've served in Iraq and Afghanistan and they say, I never used, we never even fixed bayonets, we never used bayonets, never even came close to insurgents. But I know people who've served in both Afghanistan and Iraq, personally, friends of mine, and I do know that bayonets are sometimes fixed in crowd control situations. Now, this is actually a very important point because, of course, soldiers don't spend most of their time killing enemies. Soldiers spend most of their time doing patrols, guarding things, this kind of stuff. And a lot of what soldiers have had to do throughout history, not just not just in Iraq a few years ago, but also in the Roman Empire, in medieval towns, in in the Napoleonic Wars, was actually guarding and opposing hostile civilians. Okay, and in that situation, you don't want to be stabbing them, generally speaking, but having a bayonet on the end of your musket or rifle is a very useful thing to have, and it increases the intimidation factor. It increases the protection of the soldiers doing their job as well. It means that they have a potentially non-fatal, or should we say low fatality risk, way of protecting themselves from civilians. And this is another situation where the butt might be useful, and so this is the point that I'm working around to, is very often you don't want to kill your opponent. You might want to stun them. They might just be, they might be someone that it might be another soldier in your force who's just gone mental, has got drunk or whatever. It might be someone you want to take prisoner because they've got information you want. It could be a civilian. You don't want to kill a civilian because it would create, all sorts of political tension. So there are all sorts of situations where the butt may well be very useful, where you don't want to stab the other person. And this is something that's very often overlooked in HEMA, is that a lot of the weapons we study are used not always in a fatal setting. So, an obvious example is first blood dueling. If we look at 19th century épée dueling, épée de combat, that is the sharpened version of the épée, that was done to first blood. The weapon's not supposed to kill people. You could kill someone with one, but it's not designed to kill people. It's designed to do first blood, to settle a matter of honour. This is an obvious example, but there are other weapons which are specifically designed, obviously truncheons, for example, batons of various kinds, to subdue and defend. Okay, so some of them might be designed to defend against a knife attack and then subdue someone, or they might be simply there to keep prisoners in line, or this kind of stuff. So, obviously ignoring the fact that this is a firearm, once it's been discharged, despite the fact that, yes, we've got a very lethal and very effective point on the end, the butt is also a very important part of the weapon for a number of reasons, hopefully, that I've outlined. So, just to summarise, when the point's knocked offline, it's a good way of preventing someone from closing in. In some circumstances, if you've occupied the person's point with your point, it might be worth stepping in with your own attack with the butt. And indeed, another situation is to prevent, or rather a non-fatal way of dealing with someone who's being a general nuisance, should we say. Just briefly, you'll notice I picked a shorter spear this time because it's easier to demonstrate with. I've ditched the 8-foot spear and switched to about a 6.5-foot spear. The butts with spears. People said about the use of the butt with a spear in comparison to the musket, and said, wouldn't the musket's butt be more effective than the spear's butt? And I would say, I don't know if it's more effective. It's different, okay? Clearly the butt of a spear is lighter, okay? Now some people go, okay, well, so the musket's butt or a rifle's butt is very heavy, so therefore it's more effective. It doesn't always work like that. Because something's heavier, you accelerate it more slowly. It has more inertia. So yes, if you get it up to speed and hit someone, it will have a lot of force on that person, but you have to get it up to speed. Whereas the lightness of the spear's butt means it's quicker to get into action. So it's, for me, it's, as we would say, 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. Yes, the musket's butt is heavier than the spear's butt, but on the other hand, the spear's butt is lighter and therefore quicker to get into action. The other thing to mention as well is, as I showed in the other video, because you can slide the hands, it means that the butt on a spear has a lot longer reach. Because I've got the ability, despite the fact even if I'm holding the spear at the back, if someone closes in with me, I slide the forward hand up and the back hand back, and boom, I've suddenly got almost as much reach with the butt as I had with the tip. So because you can slide the hands up and down your shaft as much as you like with the spear, it means that you can extend your butt really far out. The other last thing to mention is that very often, or well, relatively often should we say, pole arms have a sort of metal foot on the end. And This of course makes whilst the musket has a butt cap, it's blunt because it's designed to go into your shoulder. Having a relatively pointy end on the end of your spear or partisan or halberd or whatever you have means that if you hit that in someone's face, is going to have a, if not penetrating, a more focused effect on them than the blunt end of a musket. Final thing I'm going to talk about is the other use of the butt is when you have, and this relates to the use of modern firearms as well, so what I was saying about if your firearm, so this is about the same length as what, a pump action shotgun or something like that, isn't it? This is a cavalry carbine from the mid 19th century. And clearly if something's very short, you can sometimes get bayonets attached to them, but cavalry carbines never have bayonet attachments on them because they're for cavalry. But if you find yourself fighting on foot and you've got a carbine or a short gun like this is about the length of some bullpups, I suppose, something like a P90 in the modern world, or maybe even some of the shorter versions of M4. If you've got something this short, having a bayonet on the end, you've got a really, really short reach to stab with. So in this situation, if you don't have a bayonet on the end, an obvious thing to do, yes indeed, is this. I'm just checking the lighting fittings that I'm not going to hit them. So we do know that historically lots of people have what is called clubbed their muskets. And if you club your musket, it means you hold the bottom end, the narrow end, the bottom end, usually two-handed, well pretty much always two-handed, like a longsword or I don't know, almost like a Danax actually. And use the butt, bam, to smack someone with. And would this be effective? Hell yeah, it's a great big heavy club. So it's essentially a metal shafted, wooden ended club. It's like a mace in reverse, isn't it? Because the hitting end is wood and the holding end is metal essentially. Club muskets were used extensively in naval and land warfare throughout the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. And in fact, I know one account that says that Indian soldiers didn't like using their bayonets and would often prefer to club their muskets instead. So yes, absolutely it was done, absolutely it was effective. The disadvantage of a club musket is it's relatively slow, it's relatively badly balanced, it's not particularly comfortable to hold. So it's a bit of an unwieldy weapon. However, if you make contact with someone, they're probably going down, because this is, I mean, it's the weight of an axe, it's a similar balance to an axe. The danger to your weapon of clubbing a musket, in my opinion, is that actually you might break the wrist of the stock. Because this is famously the weak point on wooden stocks. So there is a very, very real risk that if you do manage to get, wah, bam, a whopping great blow into someone with a club musket, that you might break your musket in the process. I guess that's one of the risks of war, but you know, at least they're no longer in action and you still are. So there we go, the use of the butt, and that is, we could say, another use of the butt. So when you've got such a short weapon as this, obviously the butt is going to get used more often than when you've got the particularly long musket or rifle of the earlier periods with a long bayonet attached. I hope that was interesting. Cheers folks. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook. You can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon, or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.